just get started. So hello everybody, welcome to the Outdoor Recreation Council's September webinar. My name is Louise Peterson, I'm the Executive Director of the Outdoor Recreation Council, and I'm very delighted to have you join us today. And I would like to start by acknowledging that our main office is based in Revelstoke, which is the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Sinaiaks, the Silks, the Secwepemc, and the Tonaha people. And we deeply respect that they have been, taking such good care of the land and the waters in this beautiful part of the province for a long time. Let's see if we can switch to the next slide here. So the Outdoor Recreation Council, for those that are new to the ORC, we are a charitable organization. We represent over 100 associations and organizations that from across a wide range of outdoor recreation users. Our mission is to promote and advocate for access to and the responsible use of BC's beautiful outdoors. We serve as a bridge between outdoor recreation user groups, and we work to ensure that their voice is heard at all levels of government. And I certainly encourage all of you to consider joining the ORC as a member or to make a donation, because that support allows us to continue offering these free webinars that help connect and educate the outdoor recreation community about many very important topics. So the ORC is all about supporting volunteer-powered outdoor recreation organizations in BC so they can make great things happen on the ground in their communities. And we know that having, great ideas about new trails, campsites, or boat docks is not always enough. You also need to convince decision makers, landowners, and funders that your proposal has, good value. So a year and a half ago or so, I got in touch with Michele Archie from Harbinger Consultancy, and I had this idea for a guide designed to assist organizations like the ones that you all part of with conducting your own free or at least low cost research. And that will help you build support for your projects. And I really couldn't be more excited to have Michele here, and also to let you know that this guide is now complete. And Michele is here for webinar number 1 of 2. We've got another webinar coming up on October 2nd at the same time, so at 10 a.m. Pacific time. This first webinar will familiarize you with the guide, its contents, how to create a research plan, and discuss what information you need to collect so that you can estimate the economic value or other types of value of your outdoor recreation proposal. The guide, just quickly, the guide will be shared with all of you, and you'll get access to it before anybody else. and so that will go out in an email along with the recording of this webinar later this week. So very quickly, I just want to, introduce you to Michele. Some of you might have met Michele before. Michele, I think maybe it was 2 years ago, or at least a year ago, you joined us for another webinar. So Michele is the principal of Harbinger Consultancy, a firm that is based in the Rocky Mountains, the western part of the Rocky Mountains. Michele leads Harbinger's work in community and regional economic analysis, outdoor recreation, and community-based education and tourism. And Michele, I'm so happy to have you here today to share more about this guide. So I'll let you share now. I know you've got some beautiful slides to share with all of us.
Well, thanks so much, Louise. And I'm going to see, there is something about Zoom that I don't understand, but here we go. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this, as Louise mentioned, part 1 of our do-it-yourself trail user and visitor research sort of overview and dive into certain aspects of this do-it-yourself guide and toolkit that we have developed in partnership with the Outdoor Recreation Council of British Columbia. So this is number 1 of 2 webinars. We'll talk a little bit about what the breakdown is between the 2 webinars. So as Louise mentioned, I'm a principal of the Harbinger Consultancy. I've been doing rural community and economic development work for over 30 years, including a lot of economic studies focused on parks, on heritage areas, other heritage sites, historic areas, districts, trails, other recreation and protected areas, and the communities that are close to them, that are gateways to them, that provide services to outdoor recreation visitors, and that are really important stewards of these lands and these recreation facilities. At the beginning of COVID, we started to offer some online courses and workshops that are kind of do-it-yourself versions of a lot of the work that we've done as consultants. And so when Louise approached us and said, what about this guide? What about a written kind of not really a textbook, but a toolkit, a real step-by-step guide? We said, yeah, we've been thinking about things like this for a while, because in our work as consultants, we bumped into a lot of small and mid-sized organizations that just don't have the capacity, the bandwidth, or shouldn't be investing their money into consultants to do this work for them, when there's so much of this work that you can do yourselves. So if you want to take a look at our online courses and workshops, we've had a partnership with the ORC for a while, where we offer members discounts on our do-it-yourself courses. And so there's a coupon code that you can use for a 20% discount. So, but just stepping back from that and back into the kind of the idea behind this guide, we're going to go through that today. What is it? What resources does it offer to support you in doing this kind of research? How do you get started? What do you need to think about at the beginning? And then because economic impact, that sort of dollars, cents, and jobs impact of outdoor recreation is such a big topic and a big area of interest for a lot of organizations, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the kind of data that you would ideally collect about your visitors, your recreational users, your trail users, the groups that you're interested in learning more about, if you wanted to do that kind of economic impact analysis. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. We'll go over it in a lot more detail next week on webinar number 2, which is focused on using the findings from this kind of research. We'll talk about economic impact, but we'll also talk about some other things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what's in it for you? What is this guide? This is a cover, a little teaser. And as Louise mentioned, you'll be getting the guide and the recording to the webinar later. Advance access to the guide for you who have registered for this webinar. So it's called Conducting and Using Visitor and Recreational User Research, a do-it-yourself guide and toolkit. And I'm a fan of long titles that tell you exactly what it is. So this is exactly what it is. We developed this guide with support from the Outdoor Recreation Council and 3 other partners, all of which are in the United States. So we had a real collaborative partnership. What do we want it to look like? What kinds of organizations and efforts do we want it to support? What kind of tool do we want it to be? So we agreed across all of our partners that we see this as a tool for educating, for supporting, for building capacity, and for really encouraging this kind of data collection, this kind of asking and answering some new questions by all kinds of organizations that we're all involved with. And so our vision is really to boost the capacity of the kinds of organizations that you all work with, either as paid staff or volunteers or advocates or supporters, to produce solid research and to use it to further your work. We'll talk about some different ways that that might look, like how can you use this to further your work? So what's inside the guide? The first chapter is an introduction, just a really super simple, hey, here's what it is. But then we go into all the do-it-yourself parts. So the first part is a lot of what we're going to be focusing on today. How do you take those first steps? How do you figure out what you want to learn about and how you can do that? The middle 4 chapters go into the research process and really go step by step in a lot of detail about how do you use other existing sources of information. Maybe you don't even need to do your own research because you can rely on data that already exists. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later too. So using secondary data sources, using information that you may not have collected about your visitors, but that gives you some insight into these recreational users and visitors that you're interested in. The 4th chapter is all about counting and estimating visitor numbers. Super important for a lot of organizations to have a better handle on how many visitors you have, but also on patterns of usage. So this chapter goes not only into how to count in a lot of different settings, so everything from trails to events to, particular types of users, but also how to look at that data, how to make some meaning out of it. The 5th chapter is all about surveying visitors, and again, also has a lot of detail about how to use the data, how to analyze the data that you collect in this way. And the 6th chapter says basically, hey, we know a visitor survey isn't in the cards for every organization, and it also doesn't answer every question, every kind of question. It's not a necessary research tool. It's really helpful for a lot of organizations, but there are other ways to learn about outdoor recreation users and visitors. So that chapter is about that. Chapter 7 is about putting your findings to use. There's a lot of emphasis in chapter 7 on economic impact analysis. Again, we'll talk about that in the next webinar, but that's not the only focus. So we talk about various ways to both put your findings to use and to communicate about what you learned to your key audiences. That's kind of what's inside the guide. Plus, there's a resource section, I think it's about 8 pages long, that's annotated and that's linked back to particular sections of the guide to help you understand what kinds of resources are out there that you can use to help yourself. And those resources cross, some of them are Canadian resources and some specifically BC resources and some are US resources. And we want to encourage you to use a whole range of resources for different reasons. So we left all the US resources in this guide, or most of them. Really what we hope that this guide functions is sort of a self-guided tour through the visitor research process. So the first time you go through the guide, I would just read it from cover to cover, just at least look at all of the sections. There may be some sections that are really much more relevant to what you want to do. But I think if you look at the whole guide, at least be familiar with what's in it, peruse, at least skim the guide first, then you'll be able to focus in on the areas that are most relevant to you and the kinds of questions that you have about your own visitors. So who's it for? We talked a little bit about this. We see it as for small to mid-sized organizations, could be informal groups that have something to do with managing outdoor recreation. It may be a volunteer group. It may be a small agency that manages trails or parks. It might be a private trails organization or a private kind of outdoor recreation, even an advocacy organization. So as you all know, a lot of these organizations are led by all volunteer boards, or maybe they have a small staff and they have a lot of volunteer support. So this guide is really intended to support the people who support your organization across that range of paid staff and volunteers. And so you can see yourself, I think, as you read this guide, maybe assembling a team of people who are Maybe some are paid staff, maybe you have a partnership, maybe it's driven by volunteers or by a combination. So how you support and apply this work is really flexible, and we understand that, and the guide was built to encourage you to do things that are low cost, or maybe even no monetary cost, but research is always an investment of something. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So how can this help? There are a lot of different ways that organizations like yours can use this kind of data. Even if you just say, we're going to start doing a better job counting our visitors, or even if you just say, we're going to do a 3-question visitor survey. You don't have to start big, have a giant study in order to bring some information to your work that you don't have, to help you manage trails better, or help you manage outdoor recreation better, to help you reach the people that you really want to market to in ways that they will hear you and maybe respond to whatever your marketing messages are. You can make a case for funding or for community support. You can manage or, kind of feed information into plans for expansion or the development of new facilities. You can understand user conflicts. You can look at demand for different levels or types of trails, for example, mountain biking trails. Do you have a lot of demand for a level of trail that you don't have? Where are you seeing bottlenecks? What are people's concerns? This kind of data can help you shape and assess programming. It can help you identify opportunities for entrepreneurship or for business growth. And it can help identify some ways that you might be able to, or need to, or want to influence visitor or recreation behavior. Tons of different ways to use these kind of data that you collect yourselves. So I'm going to take a breath and just invite you, if you have questions, please do add them into the Q&A or the chat, whatever's open on the webinar, because we will have some time for questions afterwards. So getting started, how do you dive into this? And how do you figure out what you really have the bandwidth for and what your most important priorities are for this kind of research? So before you dive into that question, you just need to understand or I'd like you to understand what we mean by visitor research. And so it's really simply an effort to learn more about people who use particular recreation areas, use your trails, participate in a particular type of outdoor recreation activity, paddlers, mountain bikers, quads, ATVs, UTV users, people who are hiking, people who are using trails to walk their dogs. You can figure out who you're most interested in learning about and use these techniques and strategies to learn from them and to learn about them. So you can also apply some of the same research processes that we go over in this guide to learning about residents, to learning about business owners. They're pretty portable, flexible research methods that we talk about, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. So this is not, should go back, the kind of research you need a PhD to do. Where we want to position the research that we do as kind of a do-it-yourself approach within your organizations is that you need to know how to do visitor research in ways that are valid enough, reliable enough, so that you can have confidence in what you're learning, that you have confidence that you can use those findings in the ways that you want to use them, and so that you can explain how you got to the conclusions you got to, why you did the work the way that you did. And usually what we find in all of our work with communities of all sizes is that if you have a logical, rational approach that's based in reality, that's based in some sort of defensible method, that not only do you get the information that you need, but that other people will also accept your findings. So there are some potential gaps and pitfalls in this kind of research, and the guide covers how to handle these when you do it yourself. So, behind the scenes, when economists do this kind of work, they're always covering, gaps. They're always avoiding pitfalls. They're always estimating things. So what we're trying to do in this guide is to give you some sideboards so that you have a lane to travel in where you can feel comfortable about doing this yourself. One core idea, and this is as important when you're doing the work yourself as it is when you're hiring somebody else to do it, and that is that you really want to approach this work with the intent to learn, not with the intent to get a specific answer. You may actually know what most of the answers are going to be when you do this research, but you might not. And so build your study, build any research you do to learn. And when you talk about what you learn, talk about what you learn. Don't talk about the story as you wish it would be. Talk about the story as it is. There are lots of ways to select the parts of the story that you want to tell, but always be open to what you're going to learn so that you're not just doing this study to create an advocacy piece. You're doing this study to really learn some things that might help you manage, fine-tune your programs, identify some issues or understand issues in ways that you hadn't before. Ask new questions, get new answers. So curiosity first, advocacy second. And with that in mind, here are the basic steps in the visitor research and analysis process. And if you break it down step by step, it's pretty easy to accomplish. So the first thing, what do we want to learn about? What are our key questions? What are our research priorities? And then around that, we're going to design the research. This is where we're going to spend some time today talking about how do you start into that funnel. Then collect data, both about your own visitors, primary data, or from data that have been collected from other sources, could be about your area, could be about other places, so secondary data. Fine tune your approach as data comes in. In other words, if you're doing a visitor survey or if you're counting visitors, keep track of what's happening as the data come in so you can see, oh, we're only hearing from residents and we haven't heard from non-residents, or it looks like our trail counters aren't working exactly right, or this is a weird number, I don't understand it. So as you start to collect data, looking at what you're learning can help you know, do we need to do some other research? Are there some things that we need to fine tune about how we're doing research? Can we even answer the questions that we have asked? So this is all covered in the guide. And then analyze and make sense of the data, all covered in the guide, and then put your findings to work. Use what you learned. If it's mostly for internal purposes, use what you learned for internal purposes. If you're communicating about it, you're going to need to create some way to communicate about it. So, but basically, I don't think you would do this, but don't just do research for its own sake. Think about all the different ways that you can use the findings from your research. There are two kind of essential steps to planning your research. If you're going to dive into this, the first thing is just to get clear. what are the questions that we're asking and why? And what are our top priority questions? So that if we then realize that we have, I think we all realize we have limited bandwidth. I realize this for myself. So if we know what our top priorities are, we know where to focus first. And if we can't do everything that's on our wish list, at least we can do one or two things, answer one or two questions really well. So get clear first and then design your research. And then then it's kind of an iterative process as we're figuring out what the research design might look like, that we can actually do as an organization that might help us to go back to our questions and say, yeah, this question is really too much for us to tackle, but we want to focus on these two questions over here. So they're both important and there's some interplay between them. It's not just completely linear. So steps in getting clear. I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. They're in the guide. And the first part of getting clear, I'm going to give you a variety of ways to do this. And I encourage you to do all of them if you're thinking about doing this kind of research. So the first step is, what do you want to know about? What's on that list of things that you want to know about? So for outdoor recreation, some super common things is we want to know more about our visitors. There are various things that you might want to know about your visitors, like when do they even come here? Are they, who are our winter visitors might be a kind of question that falls into that category. What does a typical visit look like? Where do people go when they're in this area? Where are they from? Who are they? How old are they? How do they travel? Do they travel together with a group of friends? Do they travel with their family? What do they think about our area? What do they think about our trails? What do they think about this particular park? Or what do they feel safe there? Are our facilities clean enough? What do they think about our programming? What about our interpretive signs? Do they ever look at them? Those kinds of questions. Spending related to visitor activities. How much do visitors spend and what do they spend it on? Are our trails, or is hunting, or is fishing, or is mountain biking of primary importance in people's decisions to travel to this area? What about our event? We have a trail running event, and how does that play in the decisions of people to come to this area? And then after people come to our event, do they come back to our area again for a different reason at a different time? You could explore local perceptions. This is a fairly common thing for people involved in outdoor recreation to want to learn. What do locals think about visitors? What do locals think about our trails or our parks, our facilities, our programs? And then another really common thing is exploring things like user conflicts or areas where there's a lot of congestion, parking lots. Do we have enough parking? How do we know that? Are there areas that are under resource pressure? So a whole variety of things that you might want to know for a lot of different reasons. So the second question is just to ask why. Like, why do we want to know what we think we want to know? And so in this world of research, because is kind of a magic word. So we want to know how visitors use our trail system and what they want more of, because we're planning an expansion. So these are just some examples. We want to know if our marketing is working. We want to know what visitors learn from our programs so we can improve them and so we can raise money to support them. All those kinds of questions. So we want to know X, and then just tack on to that Y. Why do we want to know X? It's a good way to kind of get inside of your research priorities. So what are your assumptions? It's another way to probe for greater clarity. A lot of organizations that we've worked with have some assumptions about their visitors, have some assumptions about their management practices, have some assumptions about how they deploy volunteers that may or may not be true. And visitor research is one way to test those. So identifying what your assumptions might be, and the place inside of you that's saying, yeah, but we don't really know about that. That's another way to get clear about research priorities. Another way is to clarify your goals. So if you have goals around, we're planning a new system of parks and trails, and we specifically want to know where locals are really likely to use and appreciate new facilities. So it's another way to ask yourself some questions that help you figure out your research priority. And then just, what do you know that you don't know? So what are you aware of that's a gap in your knowledge that might be really important? Do new paddlers feel comfortable using our water trail? This is a question that you may not really have very good insight into until you start asking new paddlers. What would encourage trail users to stop in our town, not just drive through, do their thing, and then leave? So all of these questions, and I see this as a funnel. So all of these things that we just talked about, all these kinds of questions that you ask yourselves are kind of a funnel. And out of that funnel, your challenge is to identify your top 2 or 3 questions and to prioritize them. And why do you prioritize them? They might be all equally equal in their level of priority. But if you prioritize them, again, if you find as you're digging into your potential research strategies that you really only have the bandwidth to address your top 1 or your top 2, you know what they are. So, making a list of your priority questions, calling out those 1, 2, or 3 things that you most want to learn about, and then being willing to kind of revisit and revise that list as you design your research approach, because it's kind of a matter of what do you think is most important to you, but then you need to bring in these other sort of reality checks, like how can we really answer that question? Is that something that we can collect data about that will help us answer it? And then, is that research task actually doable for us? Can we handle it, or do we need to kind of scale back to be more realistic about investing time and other resources? And my suggestion for you, my advice is, pick something that it might make you feel a little nervous because you don't know how to do it, but something that's at the scale where you think, we can do this if we focus on it, if we put some effort into it. So designing your research, I'm not going to go into this, but I'm going to, because otherwise, you wouldn't need to read the guide. So chapters 3 to 6 of the guide, super important to just be familiar with what's in there as you're kind of going into research design, because it will help you understand what some of the different tools are for this kind of visitor research and what's involved in designing and collecting data using those tools. So I would do the questions first, and then, just at least a big picture view of the questions, and then go into what the secondary data sources are, what the visitor counting options are, what it looks like to survey visitors, and other ways you can learn about them. So as you go through those, then you can reflect back on your questions and kind of design your research doing that. So I like to work with an idea that I stole completely from the world of startups, where there is a concept known as minimum viable product, which is just basically what is the minimum thing that we need to have in place in order to figure out if people would be interested in it, if we can test it, if they would buy it, how they respond to it. So I like to think about minimum viable research. If I'm, consulting with an organization or advising an organization, especially small groups, you only have limited resources to invest in research. So the first question should be, do we need to do any new data collection at all? So first, look internally. Do we already have some information that will help us answer these questions? Second, you might look, depending on what your questions are, at a regional level or data from a community that's kind of like yours or a trail system that's kind of like yours. Chapter 3 can help you with that. And then just ask yourself, can we actually answer this without doing new data collection of our own, without doing a count, or without changing how we count our visitors, without doing survey or other on-the-ground data collection? So if the answer to that is yes, then yay, you don't have to do your own research. You might still decide, we can answer some of our questions that way, but we still want to do our own research. Or no, the only way that we can answer our questions is to do our own data collection. So some things to consider when you're designing when you're kind of designing a research effort. So one is this something that you can see doing over time? So if you're going to implement a visitor count, for example, or change or augment how you already count visitors, is that something that you want to and can sustain over time? Is it going to be something that you just do periodically, like every 3 years we do a visitor survey, or every 5 years we do a visitor survey? Or is this just a one-time project, either because it's going to be a one-time project or because we don't really want to we want to try this and see if we want to do it later. Who do you most want to learn about? Are there subgroups? Do you care as much about all recreation users, or do you specifically want to learn about mountain bikers? You specifically want to learn about people who fished? You specifically want to learn about kayakers? Do you specifically want to learn about locals or about non-local residents who come and visit your area? Are you in search of numbers, or do you want qualitative information that's more like perceptions or stories, vignettes? Which research tools do you want to use? Who's going to be involved? What resources do you have to work with? Again, volunteers, partners, are there local businesses that could help? Is there a university that you might be able to partner with? So as you're going through these kinds of questions, just make some initial notes, then review the whole guide, then revisit your notes, and be open to changing, to going into it thinking we definitely need to do a visitor survey, and coming out of it thinking, really we just want to do some interviews with business owners. That kind of thing can change as you're designing your research. Okay, so in the guide, we've included a number of research, we call them research design examples, and we use them both at the end of chapter 2, which is about the first steps, about designing your research. So at the end of chapter 2, there's a little section for each of these examples that talks about, who's this group? What did they want to learn? How did they learn it? That sort of thing. And then throughout the rest of the chapters that have to do with the research methods, we use these research design examples to give some concrete examples of how other organizations have approached some of these questions. So in terms of going back to the steps of visitor research and analysis, chapter 2 is where you find information about priorities and research design. Chapter 3 through 6 is where you find information about how to collect data, about fine-tuning your approach, and about analyzing and making sense. And then chapter 7 really focuses on putting your findings to work. So the last thing that we want to talk about today, the last thing that I want to talk about today, and then we'll find out what you want to talk about, is estimating economic impact. And we're not going to go through how to do this today. We're going to talk about that on the next webinar. But we're just going to talk specifically about what data you need to collect if this is one of your priority goals. So identifying research priorities, you could just think about this in the short phrase, begin with the end in mind. So if part of your goal is to demonstrate how much local economic activity whoever your user group is, or your trails, or your park, or your facilities supports in your area, you're going to need to know certain things about your visitors. So if you want to be able to tell this story that's in the middle, how much visitor spending, the jobs and the wages and the total economic impact, that sort of thing, you're going to need to go into your research asking specific questions that you might be able to get from other sources, or you might need to collect them from your own visitors. So this is the very super simplest economic impact analysis 101. We'll do some more of this next week. But the difference between economic impact and economic significance. Economic impact analysis is really only focused on the money that visitors from outside of your area spend in your area. Economic significance analysis uses a lot of the same tools of economic impact analysis, but it looks at everyone who uses your trails, everyone who fishes or hunts in your local area, everyone who operates an off-road vehicle on trails in your local area. So the question here is, who do you care about? Do you care only about the out of your area visitors, or do you care about everybody's spending? We'll talk a little bit more about this next week and about why you might make one choice or the other. So again, the economic impact analysis 101, there's the basic idea behind an economic impact analysis is that these people, this group of partying people, come to your community and they spend money. And they spend money in restaurants, they spend money on gear and equipment, they spend money on lodging or camping, they spend money on some kind of local transportation, even if it's just buying gas. And that money that they give to businesses to buy their souvenirs and their meals and all of that sort of thing gets spent again by those businesses. Some of that money goes to wages, some of it goes to purchase supplies, goes to pay utilities, et cetera, et cetera. Some of that money is spent locally on supplies, utilities, employees. Most of the employee spending is probably within your area, not necessarily. Some of it leaks out. And so this spending has a variety of effects that are called secondary effects. It's all of the ways that those businesses spend money that stays local. It's all of the ways that employees spend money that stays local. So the idea behind an economic impact analysis is it's sort of a theoretical model. So an economic impact analysis is the exercise of estimating the relationship between visitor spending and all of those secondary effects until theoretically there's not one penny left in the local economy, that it's all been given to Amazon or spent on utilities that are from outside of the area, or used to purchase goods from suppliers that are not in your local area. So the idea behind economic impact analysis is to model that relationship. So There's visitor spending, and then there's all the economic activity it supports until that activity is all outside of your local area. So that's just a basic idea behind economic impact analysis. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how to do it next week. But for now, I just want to tie back to research design. What kind of data do we need to collect about our visitors in order to do that kind of analysis? Unfortunately, it's a short list. So these are all of the inputs that we need for an economic impact analysis. The capture rate and the multiplier covered in chapter 7. We'll talk a little bit about them next week. But really what you need to know from your visitors is how many of them are there and what do they spend? And maybe you might want to know how important your attraction or event is to their decision to visit this area. Whether you're interested or not has a lot of it depends attached to it. So you can read the guide to think about that. We'll also talk about this next week. But ideally, you would learn these things about your own visitors. You wouldn't estimate them based on other data. You can, but ideally, you would want to know how many visitors you have. And if your focus is economic impact, you want to know how many visitors from outside of the area you have. And then you want to know what they spend per day. So typically, you want to be able to report that as average spending per visitor per day. And in order to get to that, if you're doing a visitor survey, you usually ask more than one question to get to that answer. This is all covered in the guide as well. So, and then you may ask about the importance of the attraction or event. So where can you get this information? And I'm going to focus on these two: number of visitors, ideally from your own visitor counts, but you can estimate them based on other information, other data. Ideally, you would get the visitor spending and where your visitors are from your own visitors. But again, you can estimate these things as well based on other information. And the importance of your event or attraction, if you decide that you want to know about that, you probably have to ask your own visitors about that. So very quickly, you can update an existing economic impact study. This is in the guide as well. You're going to be able to need to see some certain things in your existing study, and then you're going to update at least the number of visitors to update an existing economic impact study, all covered in the guide. You could also gather other data to do a more thorough update of an existing study. In other words, if your existing study differentiates between local and non-local recreation users, you could do some more research to figure out where your recreation users are from. So you could collect their postal codes, for example. You might update your understanding of average spending per visitors, or what they spend their money on, or how they travel together. So you can make it more complicated and update an existing study by collecting more information. Or if you don't have an existing study to update, or if your study's old, or it doesn't include all the information you need, doesn't answer all the questions that you want to answer, or you just want to start over and take a fresh look, you can just do this all from scratch. The guide has the details about all of that in it. See chapter 7, but only after you've read everything else. And we're also going to talk a little bit about it next week. Plus, next week, we're going to talk about how the guide helps you analyze and use the data you collect, and then other potential ways. It doesn't all come down to economic impact analysis. There are lots of other ways to use data about outdoor recreation visitors, and we'll dive into some of that in the next webinar. And here again are the details for the next webinar. Next Wednesday, October 2nd, 10 to 11, same time, same place. Maybe not exactly the same place. You do have to register separately for that webinar to get a new link. So questions, thoughts, my contact information will be a part of the follow-up email as well. I'm really happy to help support you. We'll go into this a little more next week, I think, Louise, but I know that Louise and I are both very interested in your feedback as you start to use this guide. So we don't know how DIY it actually is. We think it's super DIY, but we're going to know when you start using it. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Louise, are there questions we should
Yeah,
be?
let's see. Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. So I don't know about all of you, but I could just like listen to Michelle talk about this, like share her enthusiasm about all these things. It's so fascinating. Michelle did share the coupon code for her other training courses, and I've taken 2 or 3 of those, and I've always kind of found them really worthwhile. And there's a ton of information she'll share, like drives with lots of great resources, like what you'll kind of find in the guide that we are sending you later this week. But definitely kind of check out what's on offer with the Harbinger Consultancy, and use the ORC code ORCBC, I think it was, to get it like 20% off. That's very, very generous. Thank you, Michelle. So there's a little bit of time if anybody has got some questions. So feel free to kind of send them our way. So we are just putting the final touches on the guide right now, just like the sign little Soraya is designing it right now, just finishing that. So that will go out in hopefully the next 24 hours. So you will have a chance to kind of look at that before you log into the next webinar. I did share the webinar, or like the registration code, because as Michelle said, you will need to register separately for that. So yeah,
I guess
Michelle?
I would be curious if nobody has questions. I'm really interested in why this is interesting to you, how this kind of research, all of you who are listening to this webinar or participating in it, why it's interesting to you, what kind of questions you have, what kind of organizational priorities you want to support. Any feedback on that would be really interesting if you don't have questions.
Yeah, let us know. Why are you interested? What brought you here today? What about you, Alex, from Revelstoke? I've got Jonathan. The interest is how to get brand new organization support, like funding support, Jonathan. Is that? Oh, actually, so maybe Jonathan, if you want to kind of speak to that, I'll just find you here, allow you to talk. Do you want to, okay, funding support or community support?
Yeah, right.
Paul from BC Marine Trails. Oh, do you have a list of secondary data sources?
There
Michelle,
is.
that's
Yeah, there's the guide speaks to that. There's the resource guide in the guide and toolkit, the resource section. There is a section on where you can find where you can look for studies of trails and outdoor recreation from other places, and also where you can find data that data that might help you fill some gaps. So there are some recommendations for that within the guide.
Thanks for that question, Paul. Do anybody else want to kind of share what you're hoping to kind of get out of this DIY? I always have to kind of spell it out in my head before I say it. Okay. So there's a few more. Okay, so let's see. Maybe Michelle, can you see what's coming in here? There's
Yeah,
lots
yeah. So interesting. A small trail, more access to recreation areas. Tourism for funding for trail development. And data to show our local folks how much a trails organization is needed. Yeah. So a lot of organizations use this sort of do-it-yourself sort of analysis to do all of these things. Logbooks that are dependable, a type of survey. So Paul, can you say a little bit more about what you're talking about for log, or you find logbooks are not dependable? Yes. So we can probably talk offline if you don't find the, and I think you're talking, Paul, about logbooks for counting trail users. I agree, they're not a very dependable way to count trail users. So if you look in the guide in the section on counting, there are some recommendations for ways that you can count either using a physical trail user counter. And I think the guide also suggests a very low cost one, or other ways to maybe complement log books with manual counts or parking lot surveys that you don't have to do all the time. Trail forks, yes, great use
So
data from trail forks.
So Jonathan also he and this is kind of interesting. So he's kind of saying back to his initial question, and he wants kind of use this to kind of build to show support. But he's saying they've got support from government, but not from locals. So might the guide be useful to kind of show the locals like the benefits of Jonathan's recreation projects?
Sure. So one of
Proposals?
the thanks, Paul. One of the things I like about this guide is that you can kind of direct your research to whatever group you want to learn more from. And so specifically for locals, you could think about doing a locals survey, but you may also learn a lot, and you probably already know a lot just by listening to people. So there might be some more sort of qualitative research suggestions in chapter 6 that could help you engage locals, to help you do two things. One is to understand why there's not that community support, and what might help change that picture, but also to start building some local allies that you don't already have. And one thing I'll just say about all of this research in general, and we've found this in doing our economic studies, and we call them collaborative economic studies for a reason. It's because we don't think it's really great investment or use of resources to just study something to come up with some sound bites. So we always ask this question in our tell the economic story of your trails and conserved lands without hiring an economist. How many people does it take to do an economic study? And the answer is really, it depends. You could just hire a consultant and have them do a study, or you could do this kind of work in a much more community engaged way, which helps boost the believability of the data and the findings within your community, but it helps kind of build allies and advocates as you do some of this research.
So Rocky's got a hand up. I think he might like to talk. Rocky, can you, yeah, Rocky, can you maybe just pose your question or your comment?
Hang on a sec. Did I put my hand up? Oh, maybe I did. Oops, I think I actually hit the wrong button.
That's okay. That's
I
okay.
will introduce myself. My name's Rocky. I'm with the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC. I'm the grant program manager and new to the organization. And I just actually want to say I found this really, really helpful. I can't wait to dive through the guide that's going to come out. And everything that I've been working on is all actually pointed in what we talked about today. So thank you for having me.
Well, thanks, Rocky. I'd be
Thanks,
really
Rocky.
curious to get, this goes for everybody who's put something in the chat, everybody who's listening to this now or in the future. Feedback is super important for us. So we've had, we have some groups in Wisconsin that we're working with, in the US using the guide, like 8 different community groups are using the guide and doing their own research. So we know it's possible, but we want to know from you what kind of what your experience is, what your thought about the guide is, and also if as you're digging into it, you find that you need or want some support. It's do it yourself, but like I said, we don't know how DIY it is. And so we're here to support you. You know, you can contact Louise, you can contact me if you have questions, and we'll help you work through them. And that's one way that we're going to learn about how this works for you.
And like in the US, it is possible that the ORC will help support, do some hand holding with Michelle's help. For if there are, like, you know, a few groups, we'll probably again give preference to members, but if any local group would like to kind of try and do this, there might be an opportunity to maybe kind of get a little bit of kind of, yes, some like mentoring, additional kind of hand holding support. But yeah, like, definitely kind of take a look at the guide over the next week once you receive it. And let us know this week, or like in the future, maybe if there's something that you're looking for. Also, I would like to say, and I say this every time we talk about BC data, if you do know of, you know, great studies, case studies, research for BC, could also be for Canada, and if it's not already kind of captured in the guide, and then I have linked, the ORC has a folder of BC studies that we are aware of. But if you know of anybody else, anything else that we have not captured, we would love to know that, because that is very relevant. Thanks, Jonathan. Let's see. I think we're kind of out of time. Are we out of time, Michelle? Because it is.
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to reiterate for folks that, you know, we haven't been able to really directly address a lot of the questions in here, and we can try to pick some of these up in the presentation next week. But if you've got a specific situation that you're working with that you just want to bounce some ideas around, you know, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to, you know, point you in some directions at least.
Thank you, Michelle. So yeah, thanks for your time, Michelle, and for like all the great effort and kind of, you know, putting together this guide. I'm really excited to kind of share that with everybody, but we'll be sharing it with you first, everybody who took part in the webinar today. So hopefully we'll see you all again next week. So Wednesday at 10 a.m. And make sure you register. If you can't make it, we will send you the recording. We always do that, unless there's a glitch. It's always better just to be here if you can. But I do recognize that it's during, you know, most people's work time. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks for the thanks to Sarah and Paul and everybody else. It was really nice to see you all. Okay, we'll see you again next week. Thanks, Michelle. Have a good rest of your day.